Thank you for joining us today in our continued celebration of Women's History Month. My name is Erica Aaron, and I am the Director of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity for the Trulaske College of Business at the University of Missouri, Columbia. Today's program would not be possible without the support of our campus partners, Dr. Joel Andrus, a gender bias researcher and faculty member within the Trulaske College of Business, Ms. Beth Alpers and Ms. Nikki Magruder with MU Healthcare, Human Resource Division, and the Central Missouri chapter of the Links Incorporated, one of our valued community partners, whose membership base boasts women in current and former key leadership positions within this area. To Dr. Chris Robert, our interim dean for the Trulaske College of Business, thank you for allowing this important conversation on women in leadership to be broadcast to our campus and to our Columbia community via this virtual platform. To Susan and Mike with Mizzou Video Productions and the rest of the crew, as always, you're a pleasure to work with, and I thank you for your technical support. And to our students and community, and to my senior coordinator, thank you for your attendance, and it is greatly appreciated today. Today's keynote speaker, Mrs. Nikki Lanier, is the CEO of Harper, Slade, an international racial equity advisory firm focused on helping organizations and communities advance equity for some and equality for all. Ms. Lanier is a visionary leader with over 25 years of career achievements that span banking, labor and employment law, collective bargaining, human resources, and state government. Ms. Lanier is an executive management committee veteran, having leadership positions within the Federal Reserve Bank, Philip Morris, Georgia Pacific, ADP, Charter Schools USA, and the country's largest community college system, Maricopa Community Colleges. A consummate leader of leaders, Ms. Lanier has led human resource departments with more than 200 HR practitioners, serving employee populations as large as 33,000, and pulling from her critical, abstract, and linear thinking styles, has managed broad departmental transformations. Ms. Lanier is deeply involved in the community and has served on more than 25 nonprofit boards. That's incredible. Also has served on commissions and civic committees. She recently joined the corporate board for Premier Financial Corporation. That's the holding company for Premier Bank and First Insurance Group, which is traded on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. Why is this important? Because Fortune magazine recently noted in an article that only 4% of board seats at S&P 500 companies are held by Black women, and Ms. Lanier is one of them. Through her work and strong partnerships, she is widely recognized as an accomplished thought leader on topics related to transformational leadership, economic development, and advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism corporately and civically. Her advice and counsel have been sought by governors, mayors, candidates for elected office, Federal Reserve leaders, and college presidents. Ms. Lanier earned a Juris Doctor from University of Miami School of Law and a bachelor's degree in journalism from Hampton University, and holds a certification in collective bargaining from Cornell University School of Industrial and Labor Relations. She serves as an adjunct MBA professor for the University of Louisville College of Business, where she is also a member of its board of advisors. I thank you for joining us all today, and I welcome Ms. Nikki Lanier.
My goodness. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that, Erica Aaron. Let me just begin by sharing how excited I am about this opportunity. I'm so very thrilled to have this opportunity, not just because it gives me a chance to talk about topics that are near and dear to my heart, but quite frankly, because it gives me an opportunity to work with the ever formidable Erica Aaron. I'm not sure if those of you, the 102 folks that are on this call, have had a chance to work with her or engage with her, but I can tell you from a lifelong friendship that I've had with her, that I've enjoyed with this amazing woman, that she is a consummate professional, incredibly dedicated to her craft, and very dedicated to this work that is advancing DE&I. So thank you, Erica, for the opportunity to be here. So I have a lot to share today, and I'm going to try to breeze through this as quickly as possible and in as digestible a way as possible. I want to talk about Audacious Womanhood. Feels appropriate given that we are in Women's History Month, but I want to talk about the path toward that journey. And I want to talk about this from a very personal lens, an extraordinarily personal lens. As you might imagine, with a job like mine and the roles that I've had, there's just so many opportunities to speak publicly. Certainly, even with some of my previous positions, commanding the attention of an audience is a proposition, quite frankly, that I find very comforting and I have great comfort with historically. But today, this is a little different. I want to try to treat this more like a conversation than a presentation. I want to be as vulnerable and open and honest as possible. So I don't want to necessarily come to you today from the perspective of a CEO of a advisory firm or a previous Federal Reserve leader or a community leader, a nonprofit or for-profit board member. I just want to talk to you about my path and about my journey and my understanding of how we can move to audacious womanhood by sharing a little bit about my journey and my path. I'm going to talk to you from my heart as Nikki. I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of the Nikki that takes Prozac, the Nikki that probably drinks a little bit too much wine after work, the Nikki that yells at her kids when they don't wash the dishes, the Nikki that is very worried about how to care for both my aging parents and my children and my family, the Nikki who feels taxed a lot, probably more than I care to admit, the Nikki who's painfully afraid of being still. So I find ways to be very busy. The Nikki who has conditioned herself to run and not walk. And because of that, I have a really hard time enjoying simplicity of moments, staying in the moment. The Nikki that probably has an unhealthy relationship with karaoke. Listen, when I say unhealthy, I mean like very unhealthy. So I love karaoke. This is actually a picture of me at my 50th birthday celebration. We transformed my husband's man cave into a karaoke bar, and it was no holds barred. I'm going to focus on the Nikki who's focused on tomorrow's to-do list and not today's accomplishments. The Nikki whose tongue perpetually hangs out because somewhere in the recesses of my mind and my psyche, I'm trying to demonstrate that you can have it all, you can do it all, you can be it all. Because somewhere inside of me, I feel like that adoption of an ideology means that I'm not letting down the women's movement and I'm not letting down Black women specifically. So today you're going to hear from the Nikki who, in spite of all of it, has a beautifully wonderful, imperfect life. Part of the reason why I'm so joy-filled in my life is because of my children. I have 2 kids. They are Justin and Jada. I have the most wonderfully loving parents who, of course, Erica knows and also grew up with, Ernestine and Herbert Robinson. Perfect because I'm overwhelmed, absolutely overjoyed by how much I love, adore, and am enjoying my life. And this season that I find myself in, I am growing anchored and more at ease and expressing my convictions with urgency and with sincerity. It's perfect because I have an unrelenting and unquenchable and hopefully infectious sense of hope. And finally, perfect because of whatever this life is, it is mine. And I am here living it fully. I want to talk first as we are moving through this conversation about audacity and becoming an audacious woman. I want to talk about childhood because for all of us on this call, this is where it begins. We begin to understand who we are and how we are to operate. So let me just share. Oh, I also meant to say I have a wonderful, loving husband. So this is my husband, Damon. He's fantastic. So these are my parents, Ernestine and Herbert Robinson. My mother, Ernestine, was born and raised in Jim Crow South in Marietta, Georgia in 1940. She was the 4th of 8 girls born to my grandparents. And by the age 12, she had mastered 11th grade level work. She was a child prodigy in just every sense of the word. She mastered the violin and the piano, playing both extraordinarily well by age 8. Her parents saved enough money, and this is a big deal in the 1940s. Her parents cobbled together enough money with the church friends and local neighbors, begged and borrowed the rest in order to send my mother to a boarding school, hoping to ease the burden of her Blackness and permit her an opportunity to concentrate on her studies rather than concentrating on surviving. My mother was then, and even is now, fairly fragile. emotionally. She feels very deeply. And so living in the vicissitudes of racism and the Jim Crow era and the height of it in the South was particularly damaging for her. She really had a hard time reconciling how to manage that life. But her parents poured all they had into her, their finances, their time, their energy. The other 7 girls, unfortunately, kind of had to share what was left. And that was hard for my mom. She felt very, very guilty for her successes in life, felt as though her sisters had to suffer to assure her ascension. And so now, even at the age of 82, she still cries about that. It's a fairly emotional topic for her. She attended Boggs Academy boarding school in North Carolina when she was 11. She finished there at age 16 and then went on to Trulaske College and graduated at age 19. She holds a PhD from Ball State University in British and American literature with a cognate in linguistics. She holds a master's degree from the Indiana University. She attended all of these schools with a full scholarship, full academic scholarship. She was not permitted to stay on campus, though, when she arrived in Indiana, and her at that time, Black students couldn't stay on campus, and it was offensive, quite frankly, to some of the other students for her to have presence there. Her first job was teaching in Alabama State in Montgomery, Alabama, and it was during the height of the civil rights movement. There, she had occasion to meet Dr. Martin Luther King. His house was just a few blocks from hers, her staff dormitory. And as a state employee, she recalls and has shared with me quite fondly that she was not allowed to, forbidden, in fact, to march across the Pettus Bridge during King's March from Selma to Montgomery. She did, however, join the march in Montgomery, technically not crossing the bridge per her employer's mandate. She later moved to Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri, and taught English there. My mother was a stellar higher education professional, having held dean, vice president, senior vice president, and provost positions at majority and HBCU campuses across the country. But she spent most of her career at Hampton University, where I went to school, and of course, Erica Aaron went to school. She was the chairperson of the English department there, a role she had when I matriculated there. My father's from Cincinnati, Ohio. He is the eldest boy of 8. He's an unapologetic Black nationalist. The interesting kind of piece of that, though, is that my father is insanely sweet and very gentle, though he is literally larger than life. My father's 6'4", very tall football player, played basketball and football in high school and college. He attended Central State University at first during his freshman year, but then he got really desirous of immersing himself in the heart of the civil rights movement and later transferred to Philander Smith College in Little Rock, Arkansas. That was 1961. Again, Jim Crow South, heart of the civil rights movement. My dad was very sweet, very kind, but certainly not a coward. While in college, he was an active member of an organization called SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was overcome by the passionate rhetoric of Stokely Carmichael and other people who believed in nonviolent movement, but they also understood the efficacy of standing up for your rights. My father was hooked from that point forward. He took semesters off to register Blacks to vote in Helena, Arkansas, Jackson, Mississippi. He ran from the KKK in Alabama. He too had an occasion to meet Dr. King and Andrew Jackson in Atlanta. And of course, he spent quite a number of weeks and months in jail trying to register Blacks to vote. And it was a very hard time for him when he was not in jail or having to fight for his life, participating in boycotts and the like. He was also involved in a lot of sit-ins. My grandmother would later say it's a wonder he did any homework and graduated at all. But by the time he finished registering Blacks to vote, hiding in the woods from law enforcement and avoiding various lynch mobs that were part of the Southern tapestry at that time, my father missed 2 full years of college, so it did take him a while to finish. He was never one to believe in turning the other cheek, as Dr. King would espouse. He would suggest to me as a kid growing up that civil rights victories came after both Black and white blood was shed. Those were the stories that I heard around the dinner table growing up. They may be different from some of the stories that you heard, some of the discussions that you had as a child. But for me, I never really hated white people. I never hated the idea of person to person hatred. But what I didn't understand then, and still quite frankly struggle with now, was how is it that we could have a world with such duality, a world where there's such confliction and so much pain based on race. Both of my parents were civil rights activists, dad more so than mom, but to be clear, both have been jailed for seeking freedom. Both have been hosed by fire hoses for seeking freedom. Both have been spat upon during sit-ins at all white restaurants, and they have been attacked by police dogs during protests in their home country, the country of their birth. They did meet, though, while working at Lincoln University in Missouri, and that was in 1967 is when they got married. My dad grew up in higher ed too. He was on the administrative side and my mom was on the academic side. I was born in Jeff City in 1970. I did fairly well in school, just as I was told. Most days, I was a very compliant child. As a kid, I too played the violin. I sang in the church choir. I was always on honor roll. I worked through high school and college. I was a fairly shiny kid by the time I got to middle school, especially when my war with acne was raging. I had a true middle-class upbringing, however. I regarded myself as kind of hailing from Hampton, Virginia, my hometown, only because that's where I spent my middle school, high school, and college years. It was a wonderful time, very wonderful. I was a teenager from the years 1983 to 1989. And I don't know if any of you all were similarly situated during those years, but in my opinion, those were some of the greatest years in fashion and music. As far as I'm concerned, there was hip hop that was just bursting on the scene, same time that Hall & Oates and Wham, the Wake Me Up Before You Go song was out and popular. Prince and Michael Jackson, Off the Wall album had just come out and was met with large acclaim. Leg warmers and two-tone jeans, member-only jackets were donned by all. It was a great time. As I said, my mother was chairperson of the English department at Hampton, and it was then, and I believe still is now, one of the more well-endowed HBCUs in our country. And because of my mother's role in the English department, she would host these amazing conferences featuring renowned Black literary figures and poets, folks like Toni Cade Bambara and Nikki Giovanni, who is actually a personal friend of my father's and for whom I am named, Amiri Baraki and James Baldwin. They would all stay at our house. They were house guests of ours. We lived on HBCU campuses, as I said, and on Hampton University's campus, we actually had a faculty home. So we lived in that home and my mother would entertain there. That's where I grew up. I'll never forget a time where I came home from a movie with my friends and my mother was hosting a dinner party featuring Maya Angelou as her guest. There were about 15 people there from across the university and the community. And the topic of conversation, get this, was my most recent English essay. I was mortified. I got a B on that thing. And all of the guests were sitting around reading it and they all had their red pens out. And my mother had everyone review and determine exactly where I went wrong. Too many dangling participles here, too many comma splices there, no real understanding of how to use the subjective tense was some of the things that I was accused of. So beyond the insistence on the literary and linguistic prowess, my mother was absolutely hell-bent on me being an absolute lady. Young ladies do this and they do that, always commenting on my posture and my overtures, how many colloquialisms I would use. I mean, those are the kinds of things that would just give her great pause and cause great consternation. Mom, I'm 13, I would say. How old was Chopin when he came to prominence? Nikki, she would say. So I would have to keep practicing my violin. She was also dedicated to me being very proud of my skin. I remember taking baths as a young kid and my mom would come in and lean on the sink and say things like, look at those beautiful brown arms. Be sure to wash your beautiful brown legs. And then once when I was out of the tub, she would help me lotion my face by complimenting me on my beautiful, big African nose. She wanted me to be prideful and not ashamed of my skin. This was the early 1970s, and her concern, as I came to know it later in life, was that I be super affirmed, that I understand how beautiful I was, because when I stepped outside of the home, there would likely not be many messages or reinforcement of that reality. She would say, you're not going to see yourself on the cover of magazines or on billboards. You're not going to be on commercials on television. You're not going to see yourself teaching in the classroom. You're not going to see yourself in orchestra rehearsals. You're not going to be driving over bridges that are named in honor of people who look like you. Your history and your heritage will not be read about in the fullness in schools, and it will be lackluster and maybe even inaccurate. You're not going to know how beautiful you are unless I keep telling you, Nikki. So keep putting lotion on those beautiful black ashy elbows. So that was my mother, and my father was then and still is a very doting father. The only time that I can think that we were apart was really after my later teenage years. But during my first 12 years of life, every Saturday we had a ritual where we would get up and clean the house together and dance to music, stylings like music from the Stylistics, the Spinners, Four Tops, Temptations, Stevie Wonder. It was a great, great childhood, great home, great foods, great vacations, great summer camps, very Cosby Show-esque, if you could picture that. So that's what I understood life to be. That's how I understood navigating life. Those were my formative years experiences. And then I started my career. So the choices that I have made, very much like the choices that you all have made in life, are typically fairly emblematic of your early life experiences. That certainly was the case for me. I can say now at 51 years old that a lot of the career choices that I've had were because of my preparedness for the roles that I've assumed, and some of them became real for me in spite of that preparedness. So I graduated from Hampton University, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do after I graduated. I did major in journalism, but I really wasn't that great of a writer or that great of a broadcaster. So my father suggested that I go to law school. So that's what I did. I took the LSAT. I applied to 2 schools. I got into one of them. So off to the University of Miami I went. And that year was 1992. I really, really enjoyed law school, not so much for the law part, but for the finding my voice part. This is where I began to understand the lens through which I could see the world, not just as a person of color, but as a woman, and really beginning to understand the uniqueness of that lens. This is during the time period where the Rodney King trial was just concluding, and the O.J. Simpson case came to full prominence. I was actually awarded a fellowship to study law at the University of Miami the summer before law school started. It was called the James Weldon Johnson Summer Institute. So the students that were chosen for that were given an abbreviated experience of law school the summer before law school began. They were all Black students from various walks of life, and the University of Miami at that point was really worried about throughput. They had a number of Black students that were coming into law school, but not necessarily finishing. So this program was fashioned in response to that. This is a picture of the cohort, the folks that I came into that JWJ program with. There were 16 of us, and even in 1992, once we started our first year of law school, we were even told then that by some of our fellow students, that we were the affirmative action kids. They would call us that literally to our faces. They said that we needed a crutch to get through law school. Well, I'm happy to say that all 16 of us affirmative action kids are doing quite well. Pictured in this photo are 3 now company CEOs, 4 general counsels, 1 philanthropist, and one woman who married very well. She married actually a professional NBA player. There's 2 district judges and 2 sole practitioners. We all finished on time, and we all finished at the top of our class. So, there's that for those folks that were calling us affirmative action babies. It was there that I met this gentleman, and this is where my life changed, and where I think the clarity of my voice and my conviction began to become even more solidified with who I am and who I would ultimately be as a professional working woman. This man, his name is Erwin Stotsky. He had the biggest heart and the smartest brain of anyone that I had ever met at that point. His work focused on political asylum. He taught me that freedom and civil rights are, in application, contextual and conditional for many of us, particularly people of color. I worked that summer for Professor Stotsky, and I watched him engage with Coast Guard officials. This is again in South Florida, in Miami, where he would actually talk about being on the shores of Miami beaches and watching Haitian immigrants who were seeking political asylum being pushed away, sent back to Haiti, to their countries, and facing very, very harsh circumstances for having left in the first place. But also then watching Cuban immigrants coming, seeking the same asylum, being welcomed in. So he would argue that this is an example of a facially neutral policy being applied in a racially discriminatory way. He would say that this is what happens when we don't have the kind of vigilance and conviction that we do about wrong writing across the board, and we selectively do that as a country. I watched Professor Stotsky painstakingly prepare for his motion calendars and his cases. He would take these cases from Haitian immigrants on a pro bono basis, and he asked a couple of us law students to come help him write these briefs and prepare for these cases and research the case law. I was absolutely enthralled. It was an incredible opportunity to really understand how in a moment's notice, a decision that a United States agent could make could change the trajectory of families forever, just with the beckoning of a hand. So I decided that I was going to focus on wrong writing and try to eradicate discrimination, harassment, and unfair treatment in whatever form it found itself in manifesting. I started focusing on labor and employment law in law school, and then I finished and went on to practice labor and employment law in South Florida. And while I loved the law part, I hated the practicing part. It was a little too mechanical and protracted for me. I had particular disdain for working in a law firm. The culture to me just seems so bizarre and very rigid. Developmental support and work-life balance were just two fluid concepts for me. It was too foreign. So while working for a law firm right out of law school, I began obsessing then, though, over work cultures because of my own experience. I have a chapter in a book that I wrote called Rethinking Human Resources. There's a chapter in there I talked about how I started my career as a labor and employment lawyer and how I learned so much about the process and the procedures of law and the interplay of the two. I also learned about the degradation of the two and what happens when that dynamic of how work is supposed to work unravels over time. I was able to witness that there's so many times that there's unspoken needs that we all have about work, what we yearn for when we come to work that we don't talk about, but we need nonetheless. I learned that work and the places where it happens have the power to usurp and corrupt and destroy psyches, hearts, talent, energy, and joy, but it also has the opportunity to undergird and affirm and validate and sustain, celebrate, and nourish. It can give life and it could bring death, literally and figuratively. So work and the psychology associated with work is powerful. And to me, it was a really sad environment that didn't get that. So I moved from the practice of law into HR. I spent the bulk of my career in human resources. Even sitting before you today, I still regard myself as an HR leader. I've worked in public and private sectors. I've worked for large and small companies. I've worked for organizations on the East Coast and the West Coast. I work for great companies and not so great companies, for amazing bosses and hot mess bosses. But it was my job with a particular employer, with a company called C.W. Johnson Express, that really started to change my career trajectory. All right, so now is when I'm actually going to start going a little bit faster. So stay with me. This gentleman, his name is Charlie Johnson. He was one of the first folks that I met when I moved here. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I got a chance to work with him. He started a trucking company, and I was his vice president of HR and general counsel. And I knew nothing about trucking. I knew nothing about that industry, but he took a chance on me and it paid off. I went to so many board meetings and community meetings on Mr. Johnson's behalf. And while I did that, he introduced me to a wonderful couple that was in town working on a campaign This is their picture, Matthew and Brooke Barzin. Matthew invited me to his home after having met with me at Mr. Johnson's office and asked me to come and talk with them about working on a campaign for a gentleman by the name of John Yarmouth, who was a publisher then and now successfully having secured his congressional seat, is a congressman now. But he was planning a fundraiser for John Yarmouth and asked me to come. He said he was bringing together some leaders from other states who had had successful runs in Congress to talk about how best to structure this campaign. And this is the first person that I met when I went to Matthew's for coffee. And it was a great opportunity. I show you this picture not just because this was the junior senator from Illinois, now of course our past president of the United States, Barack Obama, but I also point to you this. I want to point out this shoulder here because this is an important shoulder, and that belongs to this gentleman. His name is Jonathan Miller. Jonathan was running for governor at the time of Kentucky, and he asked me, because I was at the event, if I could also help him with his campaign. I said yes to that. This is an example of what I talked about. Sometimes you move into roles even though you're not prepared, clearly not prepared in working in these political constructs. But I said yes nonetheless, because I was enamored with and excited about what Jonathan had to say about his candidacy. But ultimately he lost. And when he lost to this gentleman who became the governor, his name is Stephen Beshear, there was one additional post that Stephen Beshear had to move forward with, and that was a cabinet secretary for personnel for HR. He asked Jonathan if he knew of anyone who might be willing to do the role, and Jonathan gave my name. And so within a week's notice, I actually had moved from a role in HR that I had leading a very small team to this amazing appointment in 2007. And it turns out, I didn't know then, but have since learned that I was the youngest and first Black female to hold a post like this in Kentucky's history. I was 37 years old at the time I was appointed to this role. The reason why this role is important is because this is the first time that I was plucked from obscurity. I mean, I had really no exposure to the politics of politics, which is a whole nother animal, and the many nuances associated with state government administration. But on December 17th, 2007, I began the process of cutting my professional teeth in the public sector. And the governor's charge to me, all he told me to do was to modernize HR, modernize state government. There were 33,000 employees working for state government at that time, and I was inheriting a team of over 200 people. So it was an incredible opportunity for me to really step into the mix and do what I felt led to do. Prior to that post, I had really spent my career dreaming of opportunities to affect sustained and wholesale change in HR, to explore possibilities in work that would result in unparalleled engagement and cultivate environments where all employees who were so inclined could feel and do and be their best. So the governor's instruction to me was like music to my ears. So for 3 years, I had a chance to work in that environment. And then I just, quite frankly, got overwhelmed by the politics of politics. The governor was great to work for, and it was an amazing post, and it helped open up so many doors. But there was clearly a sunset on the time that I was useful in that role. I've moved there from that job to Maricopa Community Colleges, and then to Miami, back to work in Miami, and I work for a company called Charter Schools USA. And then finally, and most wonderfully, I got a chance to move back to Louisville. And when I got back to Louisville, incidentally, that I decided I was going to be focusing my time on writing and getting published and public speaking. I wanted to talk about how to transform HR, how to think about work in more cogent ways and more deliberate ways. I was really, really interested in how to discuss work through my female lens, the perspective that I had understood about navigating work as a working mother and as a woman executive in the public sector and in the private sector. So I was really, really excited about all that moment was to offer. But then this opportunity came calling with the Federal Reserve that I just honestly could not pass up. And it's, a chance to work for the world's most formidable central bank and do work actually not in the legal or in the HR construct. It was more in macroeconomic theory, monetary policy. Again, helping me to really think about how am I to show up as a woman in this industry, in this banking industry, particularly working with the Federal Reserve, the policy-making position, the policy-making construct of banking and economic well-being, clearly a field dominated historically by men. How am I to show my voice and be useful in this space? Well, for the last 7 years, I did just that. I spent so much time working for the Fed, bringing the full sum of my skill sets from labor and employment law, from HR, and of course, what I knew about community work, what I knew about the multi-textured, multi-dimensioned aspects of our United States by having worked in so many of the states that make up our great country. And so bringing all of that to the way that I thought about work and the way that I thought about being helpful and shaping and helping people to understand the benefits of behavior, the behaviors that we all engage in every single day at work and in our day-to-day lives really impact all of us economically. Now I want to talk a little bit about what all of that has to do with clarity of conviction. Conviction. Okay. Sometimes the extent to which you can publicly share, you feel comfortable publicly sharing your convictions is directly tied to your career. Too often, at least I find, the higher you go, the quieter you become on your most deeply felt convictions. Convictions, quite frankly, that are so critically important to share, especially as you move up in the ranks. So I've got two kind of main convictions that I want to share with you that have come from a result of everything that I have just shared over the last few minutes about my upbringing and about my career. First, clarity around who I am as a woman. When I was a cabinet secretary for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, a job that I really thoroughly loved, I remember, though, being referred to with fair regularity by many legislators and leaders in state government as gal, girl, chick. While attending a governor's dinner at his home, at the governor's mansion, I remember being given Coke check tickets and empty wine glasses with full expectation that because of my presence there, I most certainly had to be a part of the staff, a part of the wait staff, that I should, respond accordingly. And I had such a hard time reconciling that because I had presumed myself, because I had made it to becoming a cabinet secretary, to be perceived as equal by my male counterparts. But it was also in moments like that it became glaringly clear to me that I was not. For most of my life, I've been unclear and therefore unable to really articulate in an assertive way, even for my family, for my employer, what really is my uniqueness as a woman beyond my job, beyond my roles like mom, wife, professional, community leader, daughter, friend. All of those roles are important and they define many of us ladies on this call. But those roles are influenced largely by external definition. Mom oftentimes is defined by your children. Spouse is defined by your spouse. Employee, of course, defined by your employer. Daughter, defined kind of by your parents. So really, what does it mean to be Nikki? How do I talk about Nikki beyond these roles, beyond these jobs? So if I'm honest, I, like many, we walk through our lives with our tongues hanging out in a constant mystified state of being overwhelmed. Again, because we seem to feel like we're supposed to have it all. We're supposed to be able to define ourselves uniquely. what does having it all really mean? And I'm speaking to the ladies on the call primarily. What does having it all really mean? And what's the cost of it? Whatever it is, for whatever reasons, historically, we have pursued it at all costs because we believe that we're supposed to, lest we let down the feminist movement. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a super supporter of, encourager of, and an example of equality among the two genders and among races. I deplore discrimination, racism, sexism, any of the isms in all of their manifestations. I do not mind, however, differentiated treatment. Why? Because I am not a man. I am a woman. I am different. So why do we care so much about the role of women in our society? Maybe it's because we don't want to disrupt our own dissonance. It's important that we know who we are so that you know how to define, you know how to think about your expectations, you know what assumptions to bring, you know what belief systems to attach to the title of being a woman. I even have men in my own family that say they miss the good old days where men were men and women were women. The ease in assigning the narrative, constructively and connotatively knowing and understanding universally, women do this, women being a woman means this, men do this, being a man means that. So I think it's less about gender identity and sexual orientation and more about like role clarity when people try to push us to particular definitions of what it means to be a woman. There is an ease, I suppose, in universal narrative assignment, I suppose, but that ease isn't always a good thing. So I also want to clarify the plight that I think sometimes we miss as women. I want to clarify that equal does not mean same. We have to clarify this plight. For years, women, I think we have sought equality in the form of sameness, in the form of same treatment, though we are not the same. So we have done, in my mind, a little bit of a disservice touting our sameness, as sameness suggests uniformity. It suggests a resigned expectation of identical needs and identical wants and identical expectations in the name of equality. So we don't all have to like burn our bras to be treated equal. We don't all have to work outside of our homes to be treated equal. We don't all need to climb incessantly this corporate ladder in the name of equality. We don't have to have bank accounts separate from our spouses in the name of equality. We don't have to chase having it all like rabid dogs. We have to really seek our own truth. I think we have to get better at affirming and confirming each of our individual, very unique truths as women who are in the workplace. And how you think about your role, your womanhood could be very fluid, but it is yours to define. So my concern is that we've been so focused on fighting for our rights, so focused as being the same as men, so obsessed with achieving everything at work, at home, and in our communities in the name of equality, that we have forgotten our amazing, tremendous differential value and rejected in some way the ways in which the difference that we tend to approach how we nurture is different, how we think about leadership is different, our sensibilities are different, our desire and insistence on balance is different, how we have shaped communities and leadership is different, how we show up in organizations, they're different, and they all are valuable in their difference. Further, we're also literally and figuratively making ourselves crazy and sometimes even physically ill, trying to prove our sameness and our professional greatness, not realizing that we are already great when we emerged from the womb. We are women with our beautiful, sensitive, emotional, nurturing, caregiving, and powerful selves. And so as for me, I don't want my example to be the only example of womanness that you see. The truth is, I still kind of secretly feel there is this sameness that we all still have to prove So don't think for 1 minute that I can't relate to this struggle, but I just try to actively reject it. Let me spend a few minutes talking about who I am as a Black woman. In law school, I was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. The police officer said that I was talking back and being disrespectful. And in fact, I was. I can remember being called the N-word too many times, more than I can count. I remember watching my father being humiliated by police officers during routine traffic stops. I have been written up in the workplace, actually placed on performance plans because I was regarded as too arrogant. And my use of the English language was far too, it was unnecessarily heightened. That I tried to amplify my intellect at the sake against some of my colleagues. But again, this is counterintuitive to what you think about as equality. I mentioned earlier that I have a fear of standing still. Part of that fear is due to my inability to reckon with my deep, unyielding, and painful feeling of abandonment and rejection by the only country that I know. This country is my home. Now, this isn't a new fear. It's just one that endures every few years and now feels more and more metastasized. There's always the possibility, kind of based on experiences, based on tradition, based on rearing, based on ideology, based on the region of the country from which you hail, that, you know, my Blackness matters in a way that my value and my humanity doesn't. And again, it's not new. It's just kind of more transformed and more visible, as we all know now, especially after 2020. The things that, you know, we have no control over as human beings, things like our gender, our race, our parents, the zip code in which we were born, our family kind of legacy and heritage. These are the things that we spend most of our lives standing in defense of. Choices are appropriately subject to scrutiny, but heritage really should not be. So there's a lot of painful lessons that history has taught us, and I have been a student of all of them. I remember very vividly this idea of how to reconcile the unknowing demonstration of when and where hate will manifest itself with me, and especially acutely true with my children when I became a mother. I just don't understand. I don't understand the kind of violence and marginalization and muting and stunting, the absence of a sense of humanity that I want to have presumed as attaching to me in the fullness of that humanity, the elusive post-slavery promise. And because of that, because I spent so much time not understanding that and rebuking it and feeling so emotionally overwhelmed by it all, I actually decided to leave my role with the Federal Reserve and spend whatever intellectual time I've got left on this earth, whatever energy I've got left to commit to my profession, to focus on really helping organizations, communities understand the macroeconomic costs associated with the cumulative effects of racism. And so that's really what gave birth to Harper Slade Racial Equity Advisory. This is the firm that I've just started. We are, I think, maybe 68 days old now. And my work, as was shared in the introduction, is really to help organizations and companies understand how to advance equity for some and equality for all. It's important work. It's an important ideal that impacts all of us because of the demography of our country, because the country is becoming browner. It's important that we demonstrate true leadership over bringing together a heightened and more acute sense of wrong righting and advancing racial equity. So let me close my talk with talking about leadership. And this is particularly important for our ladies because of the lens through which we lead and how we position ourselves and our families and our communities in leadership. In my opinion, leaders do a few things extraordinarily well. One is establish vision, 2, they align resources against that vision. 3, they build individual and organizational capability commensurate with that vision. And 4, they are beautifully and vibrantly self-aware. Sense of humility, self-awareness. So each of these areas, I think women are kind of naturally and even spiritually gifted in each of those areas. Visioning is not only understanding what tomorrow could bring, but being really clear about what tomorrow ought bring, right? What tomorrow ought bring, and preparing using our wonderful female influence and advocacy, the environments in which we find ourselves for that future. We're really great. Women are so great at helping to discern and distill clear and compelling visions for the future, compelling visions of what tomorrow holds. And we're super great at anchoring hearts and minds to all of it. Rallying resources is another leadership gift that I think that we have, that we demonstrate beautifully well. How do we rally resources? That is not just money, but time, energy, effort, intellect, all in furtherance of that super important vision. How do we think about areas where we excel in capability building, both at the individual and organizational level? Women are fantastic at this. We understand the needs and the idiosyncrasies, the nuances and the desires of those around us, and we honor them. We honor them, we enable them, and we help mobilize and give life to them. We do that with our families, we do that in our communities, and we certainly do that at work. Finally, it's really hard for you to know if your work is effectual or not if you don't kind of check in with others to determine your impact. Now, this is different than your intent, right? Your intent is one thing, but your impact really helps you understand, how is your leadership landing? How is it being experienced by the stakeholders whose perspectives matter, those that are so critical to really moving forward because of your leadership? How they experience your leadership is so very valuable. It's how we grow. It's how we get better. Women, again, are super great at this. Now, men on the call, this is not to say that you all are also fantastic in these areas. What I'm suggesting, though, is that there is a natural gifting because of our lens, because of our experiences, and because of some of what I see as spiritual gifting. There's just kind of a natural leaning in to a lot of these principles that I want us to fully embrace and not shy away from. Okay, so as I close, a couple of things I hope you got from this talk. One, your story, your beginning, your genesis, they all matter immensely, especially vis-a-vis the work of advancing women in work, of advancing diversity at work, of advancing inclusion at work. Your frame comes from your experiences, right? From all of your experiences, and especially even your younger experiences. This frame also helps you understand your world, the world, and your position in it. It gives you fuel for your purpose in order to effectuate your goals. Number 2, once you are clear about who you are and why you are here, you can stand steadfast and dutifully in the fullness of your conviction. So always be seeking that clarity, because clarity begets conviction. Number 3, women and men are not the same. We're not the same. We are equal, but we are not the same. And we as a society, we have got to learn how to embrace difference without presuming deficit. Embrace difference without presuming deficit. And in some ways, women are our own worst enemy in that regard. But in all ways, women are in the best position to help us illuminate new possibilities in this area. And finally, ladies, and gentlemen, whoever's on the call, your legacy is your leadership. So your leadership matters. You are to be a careful and thoughtful steward over both your legacy and your leadership. Okay, my time is up. And I thank you so much for yours. Happy to take any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, whatever you have to share. I'm happy to have this dialogue with you.
I do have one question that has come in for you, Nikki. The question is, how do you keep motivated on a day-to-day basis with all of the work that you do have to do?
Did you hear me say I drink a lot of wine after work? Okay, beyond that. So I am a person that is exuberantly filled with hope. In some ways, it's perhaps a little Pollyanna-ish, but it's mine to own nonetheless. And because I tend to be so tomorrow focused, almost to the detriment of today, I'm always thinking about what am I doing today to plant seeds to flourish tomorrow. And I'm excited about tomorrow's harvest. So those are the kinds of things that make me really excited. Other things that excite me are just like the generations that's coming after me, after us, kind of the ideological footing that many of the younger folks have about areas where they are already gaining real clarity and conviction about how work's going to work for them, what they're willing to give to work, what they're expecting back from it. I mean, there's something kind of, awesome that I love about some of that conviction that we're seeing. So that's kind of what motivates me. I just, I try to keep things in perspective. I'm fairly good at compartmentalizing for the most part. So that's helpful in my motivation.
Thank you so much. And I do want to open up the floor. If we do have questions, if someone has questions they'd like, you can put it in the Q&A box and it will come over to us. And so I see another question that has come in. How do you gain clarity on something that you think you are supposed to do, but you keep failing at it?
So clarity has nothing to do with failing or not, succeeding or failing. It's because I'm super clear about a lot of things that I'm just not good at or I don't do extraordinarily well, or I have to kind of keep practicing. But I think just understanding the sum total of your experiences, those that you, like my grandmother used to say, chew the meat, spit out the bones, that everything that has happened to you or that you've experienced, do you want to take with you in the next season of your life? But there's a lot of it that you probably should and could. But I've moved through various stages of clarity throughout my career. As an example, right now, today, I am sitting in the seat of CEO of Harper, Slade, immensely clear that this is a part of who I am to be, how I am to demonstrate usefulness at this dispensation in time. And it's because it feels like this is a good kind of culmination of all of the skills and experiences that I've had thus far that then become useful in a role like this. Now, am I great every day at what I do? I mean, no, I'm messing up sometimes. I mean, I'm a new CEO. I'm new to this world, this entrepreneurial world. So I'm cutting my teeth a lot here. So I'm making mistakes, but it doesn't disrupt the clarity that I have that I am in the space that I should be in.
Thank you so much. We have another question that has come in. Do you think America is making strides to become more inclusive?
Sometimes, and then I watch what's happening with this, with Justice Brown Jackson, and I think otherwise. But I mean, sometimes. So here's what I say about diversity and inclusion and equity. Here's my spiel on that. Diversity by itself doesn't have strategic value, in my opinion. It does have intrinsic value, empirical value, but no strategic value by itself. It's only when activated with inclusion that diversity becomes potent. Inclusion is both two things to me. It is how I feel about the place that I'm in and how that place feels about me. And that unlocks for me, unleashes an opportunity to do and be and bring all of what I know, all of who I am, my discretionary effort, my full sense of safety and security, my sense of being interested in work and connected to the workplace is more and more activated when I feel as though work sees me, values me, understands me, cherishes me, presumes the best of and in me, and I can feel that back about my workplace. So to answer the question, sometimes I feel like we're getting better at diversity and inclusion, and then other times not so much.
Thank you so much for that. Another question that has come in, it says, I struggle with keeping myself busy. How do I begin to overcome that? I always feel as if I'm trying to prove something to someone.
Yeah, so I think the latter part of the question is where you start, not how do you keep yourself busy, because busyness isn't the currency. Feeling as though you're actualized and that your full potency is being activated and unleashed, that's the currency. Now, that may make you busy or not, but it's about really finding, again, going back to that clarity and the conviction, just knowing what is your purpose? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be accomplishing? Not today, but just in this lifetime, right? And so that you spend your days marching toward that goal. I know for me, as an example, my purpose in life is to help restore a sense of humanity for Black and Brown people. That is my purpose. I'm super clear on that. I couldn't articulate that even in middle school or high school, but I knew because I was too much of a hungry drive for me to always be thinking about this, to always be pained by it. These are the kinds of things that always kept me up at night. Nothing else did. I mean, like, I'm not a worrier in general, but I have always worried about the plight of the browner citizen in our country, always. And so that means that I am supposed to do something with that. So that's what I'm very clear about. So that helps me understand. So how do I back into that? What my days look like, or what, and how much rest I need to get. So now at 51, I'm starting to understand there is value and currency in resting, right? And just respite. So being busy isn't the goal. That's not the goal, especially busy for busy's sake, but clarity and conviction around purpose and understanding what your unique contribution to the world is, that is the goal. And then you back into that, how much work you need to do to effectuate it.
Thank you so much. We have two more questions. How do you deal with leaders of businesses or organizations that are not as receptive to your ideas as it pertains to inclusion, diversity, and equity?
I don't. So here's my thinking on that. I have a very long resume, and I've had a lot of jobs, and I am super open to feedback, very much open to feedback, need to grow. I regard myself as being very humble and very self-aware, but I will not work in or for organizations knowingly that are either against DEI principally, maybe they don't call it that, or struggle with the value associated with it. I personally just can't do that. It's just, it doesn't work for me in the way my psyche is established. There are, this is a whole nother talk. When I talk about racial equity, I talk about the accelerated movement around proportional fairness that takes into consideration the cultural and historical realities that have beset people of color and works to remedy the same because of the macroeconomic implications associated with this. Long story short, 2045, minorities are going to become the majority in the available workforce. That means we also have to be the majority, at least in the middle class, in order to sustain the overall economic well-being of the country. So that means in 23 years, we've got to close gaps that we've not been able to close in 400 years in income attainment and income mobility for Black and Brown people, specifically Black people and Hispanic people. I don't have an interest in or time for selling that concept, selling the idea that we have to start looking at diversity and inclusion in more judicious ways and activating racial equity quickly. I'm much more interested in working with organizations that are at least curious about it, maybe not killing it out there, but just like super curious about it and want to do better, that have made a statement and declared with conviction that they want to start moving the needle on this. I can't continue to sell. None of us really have the time. I mean that honestly. This is not about like, I'm so over it. This is about the 23 years. I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at demography. I'm looking at birth rates. And I'm looking at the reality that we will have to be relying on the darker citizen to sustain the sustenance of our economic well-being as a country. That means we got to start right now with changing some behaviors. So I personally would not choose to work in an environment where that's not already at least conceptually understood, and certainly not in an environment where that's actively worked against.
Thank you so much. And one other question that's come in, have you had any recent books or podcasts that have motivated you and uplifted you as a woman? This person says they're looking for more things to read and more podcasts that deal with this, and was just curious.
I'm looking at my bookshelf. So no, not women per se. Most of it is more focused on race or racism or the DEI minority type focused podcast work, those kinds of things, but nothing specifically that I've been studying of late that's rooted in the plight of women. So, I mean, if anyone else has a suggestion on that might be helpful, I'd love to hear it too. Throw it in the chat.
Yep, you can put it in the Q&A.
Yeah.
All right. And then one last question that has come in. How can we effectively contribute to our communities given our unique leadership perspectives and abilities?
Oh my gosh. Listen, there's just, I think first understanding what is inherent in that question is that we do have unique sensibilities and perspectives. And I think owning that versus feeling as though we have to be admonished because of it or like shying away from it. I think that's part of what we tend to be challenged by as women. We are, I think, tremendous stewards, caregivers, caretakers. We understand the human condition in ways that are incredibly, incredibly important. Activate that, like move with that, move through that, let that lead and guide how you show up in a discerning way, how you show up in demonstrative ways in communities and in work. So I mean, that would be my advice there.
Okay. And I see one more come in, so I'm going to go ahead and take this last question and then we'll close out. Thank you so much for this time. The question is, did you consciously make the decision to go about making a change privately, meaning own your own business, rather than go through the legal system? Or was it more a matter of circumstance?
The legal system. Well, I started, so this company came about because of a lot of prayer. That's really, I am a Christian, and 2020 was a hard year, I know, for all of us. Oh my gosh, all of us. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, where Breonna Taylor was killed. And because of the background I shared with you all about my parents, who now live with me, by the way, they live here. And watching them emotionally try to navigate 2020 with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery was incredibly painful. So much of what they were reliving from the 60s came back to them in ways that they had, quite frankly, a lot of trouble with. It was a really emotional time for them. And it was an emotional time for me and my family and my community, the community that I love here in Louisville. And I just decided to really hunker down in my prayer life. So I got a prayer partner, actually a woman that Erica and I went to college with, and started, attending church more online and just started praying and asking God to share with me what he wanted me to do with this burning desire that I have around trying to help people understand the elusive post-slavery promise and what does that mean for the country's overall economic well-being. I think I have a unique perspective on that, the way that I read the data, the way I read the reports coming out of the Federal Reserve. And I also feel like there's a part of this that's passed to me almost in utero. was an assignment that was passed in utero that I just wanted to honor. So I did a couple of spiritual fasts, first ever in my entire life, and just asked for discernment. And this is what came of it, this idea of starting Harper Slade, which is named in honor of my grandmothers. And moving forward, stepping away from traditional work as I knew it, and stepping out on faith and starting this work.
Well, we are glad that you have stepped out on faith and have remained prayerful. And we appreciate your time today. We appreciate what you have poured into us as a community, as a campus. We had a variety of people on the phone that are in support of our women's initiatives and what women are doing on this campus and in our community. And this has truly been encouraging and motivating for us, and eye-opening with statistics and things that are to come and what we need to look out for. So we appreciate your time, Ms. Lanier, and we look forward to seeing you again at the University of Missouri-Columbia. So thank you. For everyone who joined us, thank you, and thank you for your time today. If you are a student at the university and you are writing a reflection for the Trulaske Edge Points, those reflections are due by midnight tonight. So please enter those into your Suitable app and get those over to the Trulaske Edge department. Again, my name is Erica Aaron, and I thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.